Good evening. Welcome to the Wednesday night webinar. I'm Derek Elderman. Tonight's webinar is something I've really been looking forward to, and David Battle is going to be speaking tonight. And where this comes from me personally is 1996, a long time ago. And it was in that year that I was finishing my masters, and one of the things that we had a lot of in that masters was wound care, flaps, all those sort of bits and pieces. And we spent a lot of time in looking at the evidence of honey and sugar, but especially honey in wound healing, and burn therapy and those sorts of things, both in people and in pets. And when I met David at a conference in, I think it was July or August, and he had some material there about honey, I thought, I've just got to get this guy on a Wednesday night to talk about honey. So David, over to you. Thank you very much for coming on board tonight.
Well, thank you, Deirdre, and thanks for the opportunity. And good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to chat with you all tonight. I guess first up, some background. My practice is a multi-vet practice up here in Queensland, and I've long had an interest in using natural products over the last 30 years. But the one thing I stressed all along was that if I used them, they had to be scientifically based, or at least very strongly evidence-based. And the one product that I've used over the last 25 years that fits perfectly into this is the honey wound dressings. And I was first introduced to the idea of using honey as a wound dressing back in the mid-80s when I was a vet in a small a mixed practice and in rural areas. And an old drover called me out to stitch up his horse one day, and had a cut on its leg, and it had a classical three-corner tear in its foreleg just above the knee. But when I got there to have a look, it was one of those ones that were too old to stitch, obviously, and started to already look a bit infected. And I just told him, it was too much to trim off and get the wounds, the edges back together, and we just have to treat it as an open wound. And I offered him the usual, the tetanus shots and the penicillin shots and the wound creams and the bandages. And he asked me, we did the tetanus shots and the penicillin shots, but he asked me what creams I was going to use, and I pulled out the usual suspects, the antibiotic creams and the sulfur-based creams. And his first question was, how much are they? And I told him, and he nearly laughed, fell over. And he said he couldn't spend that sort of money. And I said, well, okay, let's go back to the basics. And I said, well, why don't you use Bricky's lime or bluestone? And we used to do that in those days. And he said, no, I'll just use my honey like I usually do. And I laughed, and I couldn't work out where he was going, or how he was going to use honey on this wound, and how. And long story short, about 4 weeks later, I went back and had a look, and I was just astounded on how this wound had cleaned up. There was no proud flesh. It had well and truly on the way to healing. Beautiful wound, and I was just blown over by it. So that was my introduction to the use